Welcome to Imperfect Momming. Our children are constantly looking to us for examples. The term role model doesn't quite cut it here. We are shaping their worldview with every move we make. You see, it's not in the lectures we give or moments where we are actively attempting to teach them. It's in the micro movements we make, the unconscious ways in which we navigate life. We are constantly teaching our children how to show up for themselves, their friends, their future partners, and even their future children. So what can we do to ensure we are raising thoughtful, compassionate, self-aware human beings? We have to become them ourselves. No one is perfect, but we can still all be better, and it starts with self-healing. Let's get to it. Welcome back to Imperfect Momming, and we have a very special guest today, Mel Peirce. Welcome to Imperfect Momming.
Thank you, Alicia. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So I am a certified coach, a parenting mentor, a writer, a speaker, and essentially I like to say that I help parents when parents are stuck and they don't know what to do, or they're wondering if they're doing the right thing. Because when you're in that space, it's so anxiety producing as a parent. And when you're there, you can't parent well.
Right.
So I try to take the guesswork out of that and just help parents feel more prepared to handle challenges, to handle conflict, and know what to do. And I do that by taking the mystery out of, and I'm pointing to my head here. So basically, the mystery out of our child's emotions and what is going on in their brains. So basically, there is a brain behavior connection. And I help make sense of that, which just helps make everything, it helps explain our children's behavior, helps make things more predictable, and it gives us tools as parents so we're more prepared and able to help our kids, knowing what is how we are going to respond, how we're going to communicate to them in a way that they best learn, they best respond based on what areas of their brain we're talking to.
Yeah, I love that, and my last guest on the episode just before this one, we were talking about we've learned so much about the brain in the last 30 years that we didn't know before, and the challenges that kind of come along with that, where I'm in a generation where we were still raised with don't show your emotions, but now there's a lot of talk about allowing children to express their emotions and in a healthy way, but we're like, well, I don't know how to do that, because
Right.
I was told, sit down, shut up, don't cry, be a big girl, put your big girl panties on, all of that kind of stuff that doesn't allow us to express our emotions. And
Right.
now we're expected to do that with our kids, and we're feeling bad about not knowing how.
It's true. We don't feel prepared. And I can't tell you how many people, when I start coaching them, I talk to them about how they're feeling, and they have a hard time telling me. They have a hard time figuring out how exactly it is that they're feeling. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing. I spend so much time working with adults, trying to help them figure these things out, learn how to really deal with their emotions, process their emotions, regulate and manage themselves from that space, use their emotions to then fuel their actions and what they want to do so they can get results that they want in life, right? All of this is learning how to do that. I want kids to learn that from the start.
Yeah.
I just think it would be such a different world if kids grow up knowing how how to use the power of their own brain,
Mm-hmm.
how to manage their emotions, how to use them. And if we had, I keep saying my mission is to build a new emotionally healthy generation from the ground up.
Yeah. And it does start with kids, but it starts with parenting the kids, because we don't come out of the chute knowing how to deal with sorry for the analogy, but I'm almost there.
Yeah, all good. It's all good. No, we don't come out knowing how to do that. And so that is one of the areas, like, and I talk to parents like, listen, if you want to teach your kids certain things and how to manage themselves and control their impulses and manage their emotions, you have to do it first. Like they learn by watching us.
Yeah. Is that kind of where you start, is like you said you ask them and they don't know how to even articulate their emotions? Is that where you start with parents, is really kind of getting them to be in touch with their own emotions?
So where I start really is I explain the connection between their thoughts, their feelings, and how they're acting. And going back to a place where, and I explained, I said, listen, when you, for example, when you don't know what to do and you are feeling anxious, or your child is exhibiting a certain behavior and you can't seem to change it, you keep trying all these different things and it's not working and you're frustrated.
Mhm.
But then think about how you parent when you are anxious and when you are frustrated.
Not
Because
very well.
not very well, right, exactly. And I bring it back to, I said, because what has happened when you're anxious and when you're frustrated, you are operating from your primal brain. Your
Mhm.
primal brain knows how to fight, flight, or freeze. So you're going to get angry, you're going to start fighting. You are either going to literally just walk away and not deal with it, or you're going to completely shut down. Those are typically the only three things that you can do when you are frustrated and when you are anxious.
Mhm.
And so I said, but on the flip side as well, when your child isn't necessarily behaving like you would like them to do, or if they are struggling and you don't know what to do, you also can't get to your calm Zen self at that point either. I'll be really
Yeah.
like, right?
Yeah.
So, what do you do in that in between space? And I basically introduce parents to, I call it the land of neutral.
Mm.
And so the whole point is just that when you're anxious and when you're frustrated, when you're stressed, you know you're not going to parent well. How, and I work and share tools, how do you just plain get to neutral so you can show up and parent your best when your child needs you? Even if at that moment you can't be your most peaceful Zen self, how
Yeah.
can you at least just get to neutral so you can parent better?
Mhm.
And so that's what I do. And we work on tools to get there. And we work a lot on learning what's happening in their child's brain. And so we go through analogies of like, listen, when you respond this way, this is I call it the puppy. The puppy's going to start barking. It's the amygdala. And the
Mhm.
amygdala is going to wake up the monkey, which was, right? And that's their primal brain.
Yeah.
And how do you calm the puppy down so you can engage their wise owl? Because when the
Mm.
puppy's barking, their wise owl, which is their prefrontal cortex, just flies away.
Yeah.
So you want the wise owl to come back. How, as a parent, do you do that for them and for yourself?
Mhm.
So we just spend a lot of time talking about the different things and also, as well, recognizing the patterns. We all think that our children, it just happens. They just do these certain things. But when you start looking, there are patterns. There's patterns to your behavior, there's patterns to their behavior. So if you
Mhm.
can identify those up front and then know what to do in certain situations, how to tap into the right areas of your brain, that's the work that I do.
That's so important. And I had a moment yesterday. My brother and I were driving his car, and he has very anxious energy while driving. And and we kind of learned this behavior from my dad. My dad's major stress time would be driving and people not driving the way that he thought that people should drive.
Mhm.
And that would be when he would get mad, and that transferred onto all of us kids. Um and so when I had my son, I had major road rage at the time. And I think I got 3 tickets while I was pregnant with him. I had 2 speeding tickets and a talking on the phone ticket. I always air quote that because I wasn't actually talking on the phone when I got that ticket,
Mhm.
but I have talked on the phone. So, anyway. Um, so when he was born, I remember thinking, well, I can't be screaming curse words at random people, like, and have that angry energy with this brand new baby. Like I need to zen out, and get to that
Mhm.
place. So that turned into a habit. And so I don't really have a whole lot of road rage any longer. Yesterday, I was pulling into a parking lot that is a very poorly designed parking lot. And I was over here and somebody's backing out and somebody else pulls in after me. And the way that the person pulling out of the stall came out allowed the person that came after me to pull into that spot. And I don't ever like that, but I don't usually react to it. It's like, oh, seriously, come on, dude. Like, what do you,
Yeah.
you see me here? It's become like a sarcastic thing instead of a rage thing. And but I got angry and I honked at them and I'm like thinking, okay, all the parents that are inside are now paying attention to my road rage. And then after the fact I realized that the parking spot I ended up getting was just as close and just as good as the one that was stolen from me. And but I was like, well, this is interesting. Why did I get angry in that moment? And I I believe that it's because I have other things going on in my body where I'm in a lot of pain and that is taking up, like I'm not at neutral right now.
Right.
I'm at whatever level I'm in, and whatever he did just hit me over to level 10, right?
Mhm.
And so I will relate this back to parenting, but there's a lot of times when our kids don't act normal to us, where they're like, my kid doesn't normally do this. Why is he doing this? But there's an immediate like, let me punish you for this this new behavior exhibiting that you're exhibiting that's not appropriate.
Right.
Instead of like, well, what's going on that's creating this new behavior?
Mhm.
Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Are you tired? Are you
Right.
stressed? There's a clue in this behavior. And when you approach parenting in that curiosity, from the curiosity state, instead of the how dare you speak to me that way, or how dare you hit your sibling, or whatever the case is, when you could approach it in a curious way, instead of you're doing something wrong, now you need to be punished, then they learn more than just now I'm in trouble because
Exactly.
I hit my sibling or whatever.
I call it get curious, not furious.
Yes, oh, I love that. And I will never forget it because it rhymes.
Yeah. Well, if you think about the fact that, I mean, there's a couple different things going on there. One is that, like you said, when you have other things going on in your body and your mind is occupied elsewhere, when something happens, you go into default mode and you go to old programming. So that is just the subconscious, those are programs that are already written, they come up automatically,
Mhm.
we respond from there. And sometimes that can be a challenge to overcome, is but part of it is just recognizing, okay, what are my old programs and
Mhm.
what do I need to, and that's one of the things that I do, is actually becoming aware of the old programming and working to rewire and reprogram new things, because
Mhm.
you can reprogram your brain. I like to tell my clients, I'm like, I actually taught myself how to brush my teeth with my left hand just to see what it would
Wow.
take. Because
Yeah.
I mean, that is, you're talking about 50 years of like a 4-lane highway of neural pathways in my brain because I'm very right dominant. But the process I saw, I mean, it literally took me 45 days to even pick up my toothbrush with my left hand.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I know, I watch all the studies. It takes 67 days to literally build a new neural pathway in your brain.
Hmm.
And if it's a 4-lane highway, it can take up to 3 months.
Yeah.
And that's how long I now brush my teeth with my left hand. It's just what I do. But
Yeah.
I was able to see like that process. So it really is just rewiring new neural pathways so you respond from a certain place. And that's just practice. So
Mhm.
over time, practice and how do you remind yourself and different things. And also, it's not beating yourself up when you make a mistake.
Mhm.
that imperfect piece, like we're all going to do it. So half of the coaching I do is all the tips and tools to change things. And the other half is how to respond to the mistakes, how to treat yourself when you screw up, how do you handle it with your kids when you make a mistake, like how to be nicer to yourself on the back end. It takes both.
Yeah.
And like you said, that discipline piece, and I like to, because here's what's going to happen. I mean, instinctually, we think if we chastise someone and make them feel badly, they're not going to want to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Unfortunately, judgment and shame shut the learning centers down in the brain. So,
Yeah.
what happens is we are actually making it harder for them to learn the new behavior from that space. We
Mm-hmm.
are reinforcing the behavior that we don't want in their brain.
Mm-hmm.
And think about when they are, what happens when we're disciplining, they just end up mad at us.
Right.
They're not learning anything. They're just
Right.
mad at us for disciplining them. The
Yeah.
lesson goes out the window.
Yeah. I know I talk about the No Drama Discipline by Dr. Dan Siegel like
Mhm.
every episode, but um that's where I learned that the first time is that you have to connect before you correct. And that and that's like the only thing that I consciously am aware of implementing from that book, because half the time when my son would come to me activated about something, I would ask him, "Do you need a hug?" And he would say yes, and then I kind of fell out of that pattern, and he started saying to me when he was activated, "Mom, I need a hug."
Mm.
And so it was, now he's been trained that, that kind of physical touch, just I knew, I had asked him what his love language was. In Several years ago, I asked him, what does mom do that makes you feel the most loved? And he would say snuggle. He said snuggle me. And so that was my version of, in the moment, let's have a
Mhm.
snuggle. And and that always really made him calm down. And it worked 9 times out of 10. The one time that he would say no is if I was the one he was mad at.
Yeah.
And then he would circle back around and say, okay, now I want a hug. And now sometimes when I get mad at him, he'll say, Mom, can I give you a hug? And there's been one time when I said no. And he said, and the next time he said, Mom, when you're calmed down, can I give you a hug? It's like, oh, that was I said, well, I'm not calmed down yet, but I'll still give you a hug.
Yeah.
Because it was such a good way of asking.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I try to let parents know. I said, listen, you have to deal with the emotions first. And
Mhm.
so that is when I talked about the three parts of the brain. And so the amygdala is the emotional part that's in the center, and that is the barking dog. So when the dog is barking, the wise owl, the problem solving part of their brain, the part that helps them regulate their emotions, that helps them communicate, that all of that is out the window.
Mhm.
And so they are just stuck in the fight, flight, or freeze part of their brain. And so when you give a hug, though, that calms the nervous system down.
Mhm.
That hugs really, our bodies release oxytocin, helps calm down our nervous system. It will allow the dog to stop barking. And then we're in a place to work through the problem, the issue, whatever it is. So that's the where I try, and that's why I try to give the visual of the different parts of the brain using animals.
Mhm.
So one, parents have visual themselves, like, oh, I got to calm down the barking puppy. Because when kids,
Mhm.
honestly, remember, puppies bark at everything, even when it's not a problem.
Right.
They bark, right?
Yeah.
Same with kids. Our
Yeah.
saying no can start their puppy barking.
Yeah.
And so if we can get that puppy to calm down, hug helps do that. I tell parents a lot, I'm like, when the kids are all upset, like, what do I do when everyone's screaming? I'm like, you just come in and be like, all right, everyone, just put your hand on your heart. We're all going to take a deep breath. And then we're going to talk about it.
Mm. I
Just
like that because we have a lot of drama around video games. Not so much anymore. We eliminated the one video game that was the biggest problem. But he wants it back. And but he's always asking me, how does he calm himself down? And I'm like, I take a break. I go somewhere else. I move my body. I would go for walks, or I would drive around the block or whatever, just to get out of the physical surroundings. Sometimes I would take a shower just to change my state, to calm down. And sometimes it would take several things. I remember taking a shower one time and just still being fuming, and I had to go for a drive. And but I like that, put your hand over your heart. He will roll his eyes at me, but he might still do it.
Yeah.
And yeah. And you said there's 3 animals, and I remember the barking dog and the owl, and then what was
So, yes. So the primal part of the brain is the monkey.
the monkey?
Okay.
How could I forget that? I used to
That's all right. The middle part of the brain is the amygdala, which is the barking dog. That's the part, the emotions. And honestly, it's the part of us that always watches out for danger. So it's always looking for problems. That's what kept us alive. And I mean, it's just genetically programmed in us. That's the part, like if someone steps out and then a car's coming, your arm goes back automatically. That's the amygdala.
Hmm.
And so that's the one, the puppy's like ready, looking for danger, ready to bark, because that puts us like, that's our survival instinct, which is the monkey. And kids are born with that primal brain completely developed they're born with that completely developed. And then up top is your prefrontal cortex, which is the wise owl. Now in kids, if you remember from the whole brain child, this part of the prefrontal cortex in children is under construction completely. So they are still learning, they are still developing. They don't have a lot of those skills yet. They have to still develop them. And so part of it is, and I keep telling parents a lot, I said, a lot of times, remember, it's not that they won't behave. We think it's a choice. They're choosing not to. A lot of times it's that they can't. They haven't developed those skills yet. So it's just like remembering, like, okay, what skills are we helping with? This part, the prefrontal, I still have to remember this. The prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until they're 25. So it's completely under construction when they're little. So imagine it like a house. You walk in and the downstairs is all fully furnished, looks great. That's their primal brain. You go to the stairs and it's wood, and you look up and it's just rafters. So that's their upstairs brain.
Yeah.
So that's the wise owl, and then in between is the amygdala, which is the barking puppy. So I just put animals to it to help. So in that way, also, it helps parents, they can talk to their kids using the animal analogies and just explaining.
Yeah. Hello, you guys are so creative. I had another guest who wrote a book called Raising Brains. And she had the puffer fish and the octopus and something else. I don't remember what any of I'm like, her book is on my to read list. But you guys are so creative. It's fun to talk to people about the brain stuff. But okay, so selfishly, I'm going to ask you a question about listening. And kids, specifically my son, not listening to me. And I will give you a short version of what happened. He has a book that he's assigned, and he needed to finish it yesterday. And he had 3 chapters left. And so we have had some activities that we have the activity that we went to, where we had the parking situation, and then we went to visit my stepmom after that, and then we were going to come home. So I wanted him to read before we left, a little bit before we left, a little bit in the car, and a little bit when we were at grandma's. I asked 3 times to get your book. He never got his book. It never made it into the car. So I know that there's part of me that's not doing something, that's allowing the not listening. But it's not the only thing that he doesn't listen to. Like, okay, let's get your shoes on. We need to get into the car, and he's, you know, being a flibbity gibbet and doing something, and okay, let's go, it's time to get your shoes on, let's go to the car. And so then me and my boyfriend are talking because it's, first time we've interacted this morning, and then like, okay, dude, seriously, how come your shoes are not on? Like, what is happening? Now we're 15 minutes in to asking you to put your shoes on that are right next to you.
Mhm.
So there's my two examples.
Yeah. Yeah. And all parents are like, and how many times do I have to ask? I'm like, technically about 36. Like, and it is, but here's the thing. Your agenda is not necessarily their agenda.
Mm-hmm.
But when things are consistent, when you start to see these patterns, okay, then it becomes a conversation of, okay, I noticed that I had to ask you 3 times this morning to get your shoes on. What's up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he
You
doesn't
know
have an answer to that question.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
how do you think we could make this work better? What might work for you and me? So I don't necessarily have to ask you. I don't want to necessarily bug you, but in the same aspect, like what will work for both of us to make sure that this gets done?
Yeah.
What ideas do you have?
Yeah. That's a good one. Then he uses his problem solving brain.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
and this is how we start to get our children to use their own problem solving brains,
Mm-hmm.
right? And also, they're going to have way more buy in if we get them involved in the problem to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, this is a problem. This is a problem. This is one of the patterns. How do we deal with this? What do we do? And then, there's a number of different scripts that I have that I help parents work through, but that's one.
Yeah. That's good. Because we, he obviously nobody likes to be yelled at. I don't like yelling at all.
Mhm.
It is the absolute last resort for me. Um, and I know it does more damage than good
Mhm.
when you yell. And I'm human, and it's frustrating when it's a pattern and it's the same thing over and over. We've started, adding timers to things, because I'll let him read a chapter and then he can have a 20-minute break. And we do that when we have a deadline, and there's always a deadline with these books. I will be glad when this is over.
Yeah. One of the other things that's really helpful is actually when you are celebrating the positive. So, on the days that, you know what, you did this, I didn't have to ask you, you put your shoes on, like, awesome, great job. We are celebrating that today.
Yeah.
Okay. High fives actually are one of the best ways to
Hmm.
help kids. Studies have been done that the high fives, they did studies in terms of like telling kids that they were doing a good job, like pointing out that either they had characteristics that were characteristics, or like you're smart versus you put in a good effort versus not saying anything and just giving a high five.
Hmm.
And the high five was the best motivator by far.
Interesting.
And so I think, I shouldn't say think, according to the study, what they figured out is that it is a shared celebration. So it's not just you saying something, it's that because when you high five, you're like, yes, I did it. Like you're celebrating yourself too.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another thing. We talked about judgment and shame shut down the learning and motivation centers in the brain. That celebration actually fires it up.
Makes sense.
So
Yeah.
when you fire it up, you are firing up that learning, like, oh, this is what I should be doing. And two, that motivation piece of I'm going to be motivated to do this again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's a combination of like, okay, how do we make this better? As well as how do I reinforce the behavior that which I really want?
Right. Yeah. That's and oh, that's so good, because he does, in his gymnastics program that we went to yesterday, that like when they do their flip, they're always giving him a high five, and of course he wants to do more flips.
Yeah.
Like, and
It
that's
feels
fun.
good.
And yeah.
Yeah, I think they did a study with like the NBA teams.
Mm,
They started at the beginning of the season and just went around and figured out like which teams high-fived the most. And the
mhm.
teams that high-fived the most were the ones in the finals.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and the ones that did the least, like there just wasn't the camaraderie, like it just they didn't have a good season. So it was a really interesting study.
Hmm. And I don't know why I wanted to say this earlier and then I forgot, but about the brushing your teeth with your
Yes.
left hands. There was a video, and I don't remember where. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube because I think that's where I saw it. Um, Somebody had put the steering wheel of a bicycle on backwards or the opposite. So when you
Hmm.
turned left, it would actually turn the bike right, and vice versa, or whatever the
Hmm.
opposite way of what you actually do is. Um, and that it took months to relearn how to ride a bike because of that. It affects the whole balance, it affects like everything. And
Right.
then once they mastered the new way, they flipped it back and they had to relearn how to ride a bike all over again, the normal way.
The
Like it
normal way.
wasn't just so you're brushing your teeth with your left hand. It'll probably feel weird to brush your teeth with your right hand now.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably. You know what? I haven't even, I just, it's now I brush with my left hand. I'm going to have to try that.
Yeah. It's so interesting how our brains form patterns and essentially they're writing over like a computer code, they're writing over old stuff. It's always still kind of there, but it has to be relearned. It's super
Right.
interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I think they have also done that you can see sometimes in the studies that I've checked where you can see like the old neural pathway kind of dissolving
Mhm.
as you're
Yeah.
learning new things.
Mhm.
So it just, the whole thing, the brain science just fascinates me. I love it. And I'm always trying myself. I'm like my first guinea pig of like, okay, let's see how this works. But
I
just
know.
having to rewire certain things when you have, um, you notice things about yourself in terms of even as you're trying to go out and do new things, when you have beliefs around, well, I'm not very good at this, or I'm not good. And I know when I coach and I talk to people that are like, oh, I'm so bad with time.
Mhm.
I have a hard time with time management. I'm like, okay, well, or I'm such a procrastinator. I'm like, we first have to deal because otherwise you will act in accordance with that belief.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so you have to get to some of those base ones. Otherwise, you're trying to take your car and you go somewhere and you've got your foot on the gas trying to go to where you want to go, but it's like you have the emergency brake on or your foot on the brake at the same time.
Mhm.
So that's the piece where it's really getting to lasting change that people want. As a coach, I really want to be able to identify those things that are really holding them back.
Yeah. And I definitely notice that I'll be on a good trajectory and then something happens like getting sick or a monkey wrench gets thrown into my life because life happens, and then
Hmm.
I will revert right back to old patterns that are less productive or less in alignment with who I'm becoming and more in alignment with who I've been.
Right.
And um and having some grace for ourselves as we fall into those old patterns and remember that we're still those old patterns exist. It's really easy
Hmm.
to switch back onto the old train tracks as we're building the new ones.
Right. And I mean, that's an area that I do a lot of coaching around and just talk to people about like noticing when it comes up, like, oh, there's that old thought.
Mhm.
There it
Mhm.
is. That's okay. Like, that's normal for that to come up. Yep. But I don't have to go down that path, especially I laugh a lot, like it's going to be one of those days,
Mm.
right? Like, but
Yeah.
does it really have to be?
No.
Like, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't mean that, like, just because you got up and the kids had a grumpy day and there were still dishes in the sink and everything, it doesn't have to set the tone for your whole day.
Yeah. I remember seeing a meme that said something along the lines of, "Did you have a bad day, or did you have a bad 5 minutes that you milked all day?"
That's so true. I love that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I've said that to my son because he'll just tell me like he had, oh, it's gonna be a bad day, and I'm like, why? Why does it have to be a bad day? I mean, it's gonna be a bad day if you think it is,
Hmm.
And the thing that I'm really working on him is we've had uh several deaths in the last 3 years, and every time when I'll pick him up from school, and I probably should think of a better way of telling him, but I'll let him know that, so and so has passed. And he said, every time I have a really great day, somebody dies or
Oh dear.
something bad happens. And so I've been kind of teasing him, but also like trying to get him to realize that that's not totally true. And I'm like, so how was your day? And he's like, it was a good day. And I was like, cool. Should I tell you the bad news now? And he's like, oh, and I'm like, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. No,
just to
that
get him to remember that, there's bad things happen on good days and bad things happen on bad days, and just stuff happens. It's
stuff
part of life.
happens. I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
I know.
Like one of the things that he said to me recently, I was watching an old podcast episode, and he said, and he looked at it and he said, "Mom, you never smile at me." And I was like, "Oh, what I have the resting bleep face when
I've been
especially.
told I have that too, by the way. So
Mhm. It's just something that happens like it, but mine is usually when especially when I'm focused on
oh
something.
yeah,
I'm
me
usually
too.
focusing on something.
Yep.
um and so we had a long discussion about it, and then I made a conscious effort to make sure that I was smiling at him, and I was watching the same episode. I got interrupted while I was watching it, and so I went back to watching it, and there was a part where he comes home before I had my green screen background. He
Yeah.
came home, and he, you know, came in and he gave me a hug and a kiss, and asked if he could have a snack, and just all the things that he normally does. And there's video of me smiling at him. And I'm like, look, it's on video. Because
It's
the other
true.
thing that I pointed out is like I have, you know, people have customer service voice. Well, I have customer service face, and I can put a smile on regardless of how I'm feeling on the inside. And
That's awesome.
if I get interrupted, I'm going to turn and look at the thing that's interrupting me with that face, and I can totally understand how it could be interpreted as I don't smile at him,
Right.
you
I
know.
know. I have to say, my husband finally started just asking me. He noticed one day, he finally asked me, he's like, "What are you thinking?" I said, "Do you really want to know?" So then I went through the whole litany of stuff. And he said, "That had nothing to do with me." I said, "No, why?" He said, "You had a face where I thought you were totally mad at me." I said, "No, I've
It's
got a
so
lot on my mind, right?"
Yeah.
And so after that, it was a huge lesson for both of us. Now we just ask. We
Yeah.
just, instead of, because so many people, you make assumptions. And for years, we did. He would
Yeah.
assume I would have a face. He would assume I was mad at him. And so then he, thinking, why is she mad at me? I didn't do anything wrong. So then he'd get snarky with me and I'd be like, what's his problem? Like, he
Yeah.
created all these issues that you just go round and round on. And so I now tell people that story quite often. I'm like, don't make any, so you never know what anyone else is thinking.
Right. One of my guests said something along the lines of, um, the story in my head is XYZ.
Yes.
And then you let them know that it is 100% a story in your head. And if I'm right, like, let's talk about it. If I'm wrong, let me know how I'm wrong,
Yeah.
and it's communication.
It's true.
Yeah.
It is
Is
so true.
is there a piece of advice that you want to share with moms listening?
Yes, I do. And that part is, like you said, that grace part of when knowing, I mean, we are all going to make mistakes. We're one, it know that it starts with you.
Mm.
It is okay. And I tell parents, like, it's actually a good thing to make mistakes because then, as long as you are apologizing, working to make things right, taking responsibility for what you did, our kids learn just as much from that than they do from us being like doing the right thing all the time.
Mhm.
So have grace for that piece of like, and because if you're beating yourself up, actually, when you're not kind to yourself, you are not kind to your family.
Mm.
The kinder you are to yourself in those moments, the kinder you will be to your family as well.
That's so true. And how people treat others is a reflection of how they treat themselves. And
Hmm.
that's sort of a different way of saying hurt people hurt people.
It's true.
And when you think about it, other people's behavior in that way, then it leads to more compassion for that person. Because I mean, if you were coming at me real hard with a lot of emotion, I'd be like, oh, what's going on with you?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
In
No. And it's so true. And we want, I mean, think about what we want for our kids. We want our kids to have grace for themselves.
Mhm.
They have to learn somewhere.
Yeah.
And so when we have no grace for ourselves, that's what we're teaching them.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's just so many things like and it can be hard to do things for yourself. But when you take a step back and you think about, well, what is it that I really want to teach my kids about this? It's a little easier.
Yeah. And it's so easy to or it's easier to do self-improvement things for your kids than to do self-improvement things for yourself, because that's just not how we've been programmed in our
Mhm.
society. We're the caretakers, we're supposed to take care of everyone else. We're last. That's the message that women, I believe, have gotten over millennia. And the new message is put your mask on first,
Mhm.
fill your cup first, because when you fill your cup first, you can give from the overflow. If you are putting everybody else's mask on, you're going to pass out. And then you can't help anybody else, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's the piece where I think the my parent from neutral concept just is because I'm like, okay, you're not going to be perfect, but let's just try to get to a little more neutral.
Mhm.
You could just get to neutral. Then from there, you're better off, your family's better off. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
Is there a book that you recommend that's been instrumental in your personal development journey?
I have, well, you know me and the brain stuff.
Mhm.
I
I
love it
love
all.
the brain books. Give them to
I
me.
do. So, well, from a parenting perspective, there's always The Whole Brain Child by Dr. Daniel Siegel and Dr. Payne Bryson. I love those. And then from a personal perspective, there's a short one actually called Train Your Brain. It's by Dana Wild. And it was actually developed for people that are in the sales and network marketing field. But because when you're doing that, you really need to do a lot of mental management. And so she talked about the different parts of the brain, and it just explained it in a way that I just thought made so much sense. And it was easy to understand and very practical. And so, yes, I loved that one too.
I was like, it sounds familiar, but that's why it sounds familiar, because I was in network marketing and direct sales for a long time. So it makes I don't think I ever read it, but I think it does sound familiar. And I actually remember the first time that I learned a lot of this brain stuff. And it was at a family camp, a um family retreat, whatever it was called, doesn't matter.
Mhm.
I think it was a women's retreat. And I remember the speaker was talking about brain stuff, and I'm just like on the edge of my seat, like, what? This this is so interesting. And there was a woman next to me, she's like, ugh, so tired of hearing about brain stuff. And I think her husband did something with teaching about it, and she was
Oh,
over it. And I'm just like, how do you get over it? I'm like obsessed with it.
yeah, I am. I'm fascinated with it because it just, to me, it's the science beneath everything. It just, all of a sudden, things make so much more sense. And I think as well, it makes parenting so much easier when you start to understand that.
Yeah, definitely. And your little animal tips and tricks is your helps remember, like, break it down in a way that, because prefrontal cortex and the amygdala and whatever
Yeah.
the other thing, it's like it's hard to remember and what it does. And I know Dr. Dan Siegel talks about, the primal brain, and the learning brain shuts off, and then your primal brain gets activated, and
Mhm.
that makes sense to me after hearing it many, many years. But when you're just being introduced into this stuff, it's really great to have the monkey get activated and the barking puppy and the owl flies away. It's like that, like you have the visual of it. And I've only heard you say it 3 times while we've been on the podcast, and I can repeat it now.
Right.
And so yeah, it's very helpful, and you're doing great things for parents.
Thank you.
And where can our listeners find you?
So I am on, I'm on the socials. So basically, I do have a website. It's melpeirce.com. It's MELPEIRCE. So my last name, it is spelled backwards. So
I
it
before
is
E,
EI.
except after C.
I know. Everyone tries to correct it for me. I'm like, no, it really is spelled that way. So I have my website. I am melpeirce.coach out on Instagram. I am, and I think I'm Mel Peirce. My business page is just under Mel, might be melpeirce.coaching, I think. So I can get you all the links so you
Yes.
have them. And I did want to offer as well to your community that, and I can send you a link. If one of the things that I like to do with people, if I'm like, if they have a particular challenge, is just say in one call, we will get on, we will attack the one challenge and we will find out what is going on. I'm pointing to my head in your brain that is keeping you stuck. That is not like what's going on up here that is making it so you can't find your way out of this. And so I just want to offer that it's a free call. I tell people, I'm like, just let's get through the one thing. If you decide to work with me, again, great. If not, at least you got help on the one thing.
Pull out the one domino and the rest of the dominoes don't
Yeah.
fall. That's amazing. And I already know who I'm going to send that to. So that's awesome.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for a great conversation and pouring into our guests and into me and helping me with my little challenge that I'm still working on.
Absolutely. Happy to. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been awesome to spend time with you today.
Absolutely. So we'll have another episode of Imperfect Momming next week. And until then, keep healing. Bye, guys. Thank you for tuning in to Imperfect Momming. It's time for us to step up and realize that our power is not in trying to shape our children. Our power lies in shaping ourselves into the people we want our children to model themselves after. Don't just do it for your kids. Do it for yourself. When you become a more self-aware, compassionate, and confident person, you and everyone around you benefit. For more information about me and my work, visit AliciaLyons.com. That's ALYSIALYONS.com. See you next time.